Welcome. I'm Gary Salman, CEO of Black Talon Security, and welcome to Disaster Recovery Planning. Our agenda and learning objectives for today are to help you understand the best practices in order to prevent ransomware attacks. We'll talk a little bit about technologies and solutions that can help minimize the chances of a cyber attack, what to do if you are hit by a cyber attack, and then really talking about establishing emergency procedures and policies to help you recover from a cyber attack. So let's understand ransomware and really the financial and reputational impact. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important everyone understands what the impacts are of a ransomware attack. So, what are the primary causes of ransomware? How do you get it in your practice? Well, hackers will typically launch three different types of attacks against your practice. The first is what we call the exploitation of your people, right? We'll talk about that. That's sending phishing type emails. The exploitation of your technology, where the hackers are going to scan your servers, your workstations, devices on your network. And then really the exploitation of third parties. It could be a software vendor, an IT company, imaging equipment. We're not going to spend much time on that today. So how do you prevent a ransomware attack? I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm probably covered. I have an IT company that takes care of this for me, but do you? Let's talk about this. So the first thing that you really need to do is identify what's called your attack surface, right? Your attack surface is really every entry point into your network, right? So we have to identify and address the risk associated with your people and your environment, which is kind of your computers and your firewalls, all of your IT resources. So if you don't have good visualization on all of your computers, their vulnerabilities, your firewall or firewalls and their vulnerabilities, and your people, then your attack surface is pretty significant and the likelihood of you being hit is high. So let's help you better understand how you can actually prevent ransomware. So first, you have to implement a vulnerability management solution, and it needs to be managed by credentialed security experts. They go by the acronym of CISP. Now, most IT companies don't have CISPs on staff, right? This is a credentialed individual who has gone through a lot of training, a lot of courses in order to be a credentialed security expert versus a generalist or someone who isn't credentialed that kind of just looks at data. Maybe they have some security knowledge, but it's like going to a doctor and finding out they're not an MD or a DO, right? Or a DDS or a DMD. They just claim to be a doctor, but they're not. So you have to scan your firewalls for vulnerabilities on a monthly basis. Right? If you're not scanning your firewalls for vulnerabilities on a monthly basis, eventually your firewall is going to get breached because hackers constantly find new ways to exploit vulnerabilities. Your IT vendor may misconfigure the firewall software may go out of date. You must scan your computers every 6 hours. Literally every day, new vulnerabilities are coming out for your computers. And if you're not scanning your computers multiple times per day, eventually the hackers are going to scan them for you and break in. And then you have these IoT devices like phone systems, security cameras, smart thermostats. They're all in your office. If you're not scanning those for vulnerabilities, you may be hit through those types of technologies as well. So you have to train your employees on threats. This is a huge risk to any organization. Federal law, HIPAA, requires you to have a formalized cybersecurity awareness training program in place that educates and empowers your team members on the various types of cyber threats so they can look at email, say, whoa, hold on, this is a phishing email. This is a spear phishing email. This appears to be an email from my dentist down the street, but maybe their email got compromised and the hackers are sending you malicious emails to your referrals email system. They also have to be tested with simulated phishing emails. How do you know your employees are actually able to detect these types of attacks without some type of test? The next thing we need to do is make sure you're utilizing multi-factor or two-factor authentication wherever possible. So turn on MFA for email accounts, your bank accounts, any type of financial transactions, cloud-based file sharing sites, social media. Just do a little Google search. How do I turn on MFA for Chase Bank? And make sure you turn it on. Hackers who gain access to your usernames and passwords may get right into your accounts if you don't have this 2FA turned on. Next, limit remote access. If you turn on remote access to your system, understand that this is increasing your attack surface and leaves you highly vulnerable. Many IT companies will turn this technology on, not configure it properly, and basically your network is sending out a beacon to hackers saying, hey, I'm out here, I have a remote connection, who wants to connect to me? And hackers will sit there and spend days or weeks trying to break into your remote access. Implement an XDR solution. This is known as extended detection and response. This is artificial intelligence based technology that has the capability of understanding what you do, what you don't do on your network, the types of software applications you install and utilize, and then most importantly, it has the capability of picking up the fingerprint of a cyber attack, the tools that hackers use to execute an attack against you, and instantly launching a counterstrike and killing those types of hacking tools. And then it will often isolate that machine that was potentially impacted or potentially accessed, and it'll isolate it from the rest of the network, trying to prevent the malicious code from spreading to other machines if there's a chance that it did in fact execute on the machine. So it has multiple stop gaps. It'll try and kill the code in real time, but it may also isolate the machine. Have a penetration test performed. I heard it best. I was at a very, very high-end conference. Multiple government agencies were there. Some of the largest healthcare institutions in the United States attended it. And one of the agents said this. He said, you're going to have a pen test done in one of two ways. Either it's going to be free and the hackers are going to do it for you, or you're going to pay some money to a cybersecurity company and they're going to do it. Now, the hackers are going to charge you nothing, but it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars when you get hit, or you pay a cybersecurity company to do it and it's going to cost a fraction of that. You have to have a penetration test done in order to determine whether or not your network is vulnerable to a hacking incident. Conduct a security risk assessment. This is required under federal law. You must conduct a third-party assessment where a third party like a cybersecurity company is going to come in. They're going to evaluate your entire operation. They're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, run tests on the network, on the firewalls to determine where you're vulnerable. This should be done almost on an annual basis, but you have to conduct at least one. All right, so let's talk about preparing for a disaster. So, what's a disaster and recovery plan? Well, most practices actually have nothing in place. They feel, hey, if something happens, I'm just going to pick up the phone and call someone, and magically my problems are going to be resolved. I can tell you in most cases, it does not work that way. So, a disaster recovery plan really includes processes and procedures to follow in the event of an incident. So, conceptually, if this happens, then I do this. But most practices, doctors, administrators don't have a plan. These plans must be written and stored somewhere that everyone has access to. Don't leave them just on your network, because if your server gets stolen, you have a flood, you have a fire, you have ransomware, you probably can't get to those plans. You must implement and test your plans. Just having some type of written documentation that's never been tested and implemented is kind of a recipe for failure. It's kind of like having an emergency plan in your office and never ever testing it. The plans must be kept up to date, right? For some of the practices that we see that have plans in place, we find that they're years old and they are actually out of date, and many things are not applicable. There are software applications that allow you to basically create and manage these types of plans. It's very important to try and use these. So, what types of disasters do we need to plan for? It's not always a cyber event. It could be a flood, A fire, theft, hardware, software failures, right? Those are very common. Electrical and power grid outages. Someone hits a telephone pole, right in front of your office, the power lines come down, your phone lines go down. You have no electricity, you have no telephone capability within your practice. So how do you deal with that? It could be a cyber event, a ransomware event, civil unrest. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we've seen many cities, experience very significant civil unrest events where people are breaking down doors, windows. Right? We had a practice call us about a year ago saying, "Hey, they're breaking through all the windows and doors on our street. What happens if someone gets into our office? What do we do? How do we protect our data?" And then communications failure, right? Your internet goes down, your telephone lines go down. What do you do? All right, so let's talk about the types of data that you need to track. So let's start out with passwords. We've done so many ransomware cases where the IT vendor is not available. It's on a weekend, or even worse, the IT vendor is a victim of the attack too. So we'll go to the practice and say, "Hey, we need the passwords to your firewalls, to your servers, to your software, to your backups, to computers." And they're like, "Yeah, we don't have all of that. My IT vendor has the password to the server or the password to the firewall." You could be in a lot of trouble there because it may delay the recovery of your network by days. You need to have installation files on external media. So many of you have imaging software, practice management software, time clock, accounting packages, etc. In the event that a server needs to be rebuilt, recovered, new technology needs to be brought in to allow you to function because maybe all of the computers are encrypted with ransomware. If you don't have access to the software, once again, this significantly delays the process. And most practice management software companies and imaging companies are not available on the weekend. So it's not like you can even call them and say, "Hey, can you overnight a disk to me? Can you download this to me?" They're not going to answer their phones. You need this on external media. All right, vendor contact information. So you need to have emergency phone numbers, contact information for cybersecurity company and IT company, tech support for imaging, practice management. Get the phone number and cell phone numbers of your sales reps, trainers, right? The managers at various vendors, get their phone numbers, even if they'll see if they'll give you their cell phone number. Your internet provider. Here's a big one, your insurance company. There's been many cases that we've worked where the victim knows they have an insurance policy. They can't find it. They don't have the phone number to their agent. Maybe it's even the weekend. You can't get a hold of anyone. And even worse, they may not even know their policy number, right? Don't store any of your insurance policies on your network. If it gets hit with a cyber attack, the hackers will steal your insurance policy and find out how much cyber coverage you have and will basically demand that amount of money and more. Have phone numbers for your attorneys, landlords, maintenance folks, right? Once again, it's not always a cyber event. Maybe someone walks into your office on a Saturday and sees a foot of water in your office and they don't know who to call. They don't know the landlord. They don't know the name of a plumber. Have all this information available. You must have a comprehensive list of all the inventory in your practice. This includes all of the computer names, their serial numbers, basically what's on each computer. So in the event this needs to be rebuilt or you need to file an insurance claim, you have all of that information. Banking and credit card information. Many times all of your computers are encrypted with ransomware and you don't have access to that. Right? So you want to have that type of information written down, the names of the banks, the credit cards that you use, the names of and phone numbers of personal bankers. And here's another one. A lot of people have auto debits from their accounts, right? And then if something happens to that account, you need to move banks, etc. You may not even know who you need to pay, right? Access to old school blank checks. Many people send payments online. If you can't get online for various reasons or computers are down, you may need handwritten checks. All right, let's talk about the types of things that need to be backed up. So if you have an event in your practice, a ransomware attack, a fire, a theft, a flood, and your server, your computers are unavailable, you probably have no idea which patients are coming in over the next couple of weeks. In the event of a ransomware attack, you're going to be down for about 2 weeks. That's the reality of it. So every day, all those patients who are scheduled are still showing up at your office. So what I recommend is print out your schedule, right? Every week, print out the next couple of weeks, and you have a hard copy of it. So you know who's coming in, what they're coming in for, and then you have their phone numbers if you need to call them to reschedule. You should also be backing up your data offsite. So that not only includes backing up into the cloud, but to external hard drives, a physical backup that you can take home with you every night. I know it's an old school approach, and a lot of IT companies will argue with us saying that, who needs that anymore? I just sold this practice a $2,000 backup. But they don't see what we see, and we see in many cases the hackers will gain access to your backups and destroy them. So the only thing that's going to save you is that hard drive sitting at home on your dining room table. All right, then copies of your forms, consent forms, health history forms, estimates. There's a good possibility that maybe you can kind of get by using paper records, but if you don't even have those paper records to begin with, you're going to be in trouble. So have some hard copies available. Test your backups. We've seen so many cases where practices thought they had the data backed up. Maybe they had a partial backup. Maybe they had no data being backed up because someone made a mistake, and then they need to restore it, and either no data is there or only partial data is there. So force your IT companies to show you that all of the correct data is backed up, and then have them restore it for you. In many cases, that restoration process could take 24 to 48 hours. It could take days, especially if your only backup is in the cloud. Create an emergency box. Literally get a cardboard box or a plastic box and keep all of this information that we talked about in this box. Backups to your software, right? These paper documents we discussed, and keep it in potentially 2 locations, maybe in a fireproof safe, and then maybe at a doctor's home, right? So that information is recoverable. All right, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, concerns, I'm happy to address them for you. And thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. See ya.